Hello, Camp Pros. This is Oliver Gregan. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the executive director at YMCA Camp Winona in DeLeon Springs, Florida.
My name is Matt Wilfrid. My pronouns are also he, him. I'm the executive producer of podcasting at Go Camp Pro, and you, my friends, are listening to First Class Counselors.
This is a series for camp directors to give to their counselors as they hire and prepare them for the upcoming summer.
Because great camp directors know that counselors have, in our opinion, the most important job at camp. Because a camp counselor's abilities will make or break a camper's week. And if a camper comes back, it's usually thanks to the friends and the memories they've made. And all of those things are facilitated by a camp counselor.
So thank you for tuning in to First Class Counselors. Here, we are going to cover one specific topic and cover the essentials as fast as we can.
It's the need to knows.
They can't go without.
The fundamentals.
The basics. And what are we talking about today? Today, we are talking about P.R.A.C.tical. I didn't think about how that would sound out loud, but practical skills with a little bit of an acronym in there that will tickle your fancy, I guess.
I like it.
Because these are not just any skills. These are ones that you have actually been learning the last 2 years from living through COVID. And this is the cool thing is you can actually take those things you've been learning to camp. You already have them. Today, we're just going to identify them and teach you how to put them to good use.
And even more than that, we want to start to teach you a little bit about preparing for your camp interview for the coming summer. And a lot of what interviewers are looking for is for you to relate the experience that you've had in your real life or in other situations and bring it to the context of camp. And the pandemic has been such a using the word great is a bit of a misnomer, but it's been such a learning opportunity, and dare I say it, a great learning opportunity for a lot of us in a lot of different ways. I mean, of course, there's been hardships, and of course, it's affected everyone differently. But I think there's some real practical things that we can take away from our last 2 years in the pandemic, and P.R.A.C. are the first 4 skills that we're going to outline. And if you like this episode and you send us some feedback about it, we'll get to the tickle part a little bit later, but we'll start with P.R.A.C. today. So jumping into it, how we're going to do this, we'll talk about the skill that we thought the pandemic taught us, how a quick reminder, even though we all know how the pandemic taught us that skill. And then Oliver and I are each going to give you our take on how, as a camp counselor, you are going to use that skill. So if you were in an interview, you could say, the pandemic has taught me this, and this is a way that I know that I'll apply it to camp this summer. And that will set you up for immediate success in an interview. If I heard someone who was applying for a camp job where I was interviewing them and they could speak so articulately about how their past experience applies to their future at camp, I'm already, there's definitely a check mark beside their name. So you ready, Oliver?
I'm ready to go.
Okay. I appreciate how patient you were waiting for me to finish my ramble, because patience is the P in our pandemic skills. Patience and perseverance is what we said. I thought of this while I was standing in line to get a rapid test today, and I was standing outside in the cold of Ontario, Canada for 45 minutes waiting for the line to move for me to get my rapid test. And then a couple days before, waiting in a line to get my booster shot and waiting for test results, and even waiting for this whole pandemic to be over. There have been countless times throughout the last 2 years where we've had to wait and we've had to persevere through ever increasing tough situations. And that has been something that, not a lot of people have had to face in such a significant way before COVID. So Oliver, how do camp counselors connect that experience to what they might be going through this summer as a camp counselor?
Yeah, and first, just to keep connecting it to what we've been having with COVID, right? Like, even I personally, I'm up in Connecticut for the holidays, spending it with family and such. And I got to spend a little bit of time in New York, and Florida and New York are 2 very different areas in how they've been treating COVID procedures and everything. So even today, like, I was still waiting in lines like you talk about, but, New York has instilled, you are now showing your vaccination card and ID for restaurants that you're going into. Right. I believe Boston is doing the same, and some other major cities are probably going to follow in suit. And it's just another step in the process, right? Another practical thing that you need to do because of COVID that you're now practicing, right? This is just a new thing. Like originally it was, keeping that physical distance from people. Then it was putting on masks. And for a lot of people, they might be losing patience with all the new things that they need to persevere or do in order to make it possible. To get through what's going on at camp is going to be the next thing, where there's going to be things that camp are going to instill that you have to be patient on and persevere and kind of say like, okay, cool, this is the next step of that process. And this is where I really want to hit on for you, is it's not just going to be about you having to take on these challenges. It's going to be for your campers too. Yes, they've gone through school, they've done some of these processes as things have been going on, but camp is going to be a new environment to have to take on some of these new practices. Just like for me, coming up from Florida to New York for the holidays, I've needed to introduce myself to an environment and what the mandates are here that I have to practice that I didn't have to do while I was down there in Florida, connect those points. And to look at it, you can say like, here are the things that are going to get frustrated. Like when your cabin is moving as a group, and it may not even be because of mandates that COVID has put in your camp, but it's going to be those things in patience where maybe one camper is moving at a faster pace. Maybe they've gotten to do the activity you've already done before and they're like, all right, cool, I'm ready to move on. Like I've been there, done that. Maybe it's the opposite and they just don't want to do the activity. They're like, well, I don't want to do archery, so why are we going to do archery? And you got to teach them to be patient and, respect the rest of the group's chance to have that new thing. So you as a counselor are going to have to do a few things. You're going to have to teach them some of those skills that help them get through those times where they're feeling impatient or they just don't want to take on that obstacle. And that might be like, hey, so instead of doing the obstacle, maybe we cheer on someone who hasn't done it. Teach them how to do it because you've already done it. Maybe it's finding an appropriate way for them to entertain themselves, right? So it might be something like, hey, look, we can bring a book to this activity because you can read off to the side if you really don't want to go swimming. Like we're not going to require everyone to go in the water every single day for free swim if they really don't want to. And we're okay with that at camp because we want to make sure everyone's hitting their comfort level. Maybe it's saying like, hey, can you do this little job for me? Which could be something really simple. I once had a counselor ask a camper to pick up rocks that were on the waterfront beach, right? So that like when people were running around, they wouldn't like stub their toe or something. And the kid had a blast doing it. And it's kind of like a random thing. And you like normally wouldn't ask a camper to do like a job on camp, but that sense of responsibility that they get is maybe more empowering to them than whatever other thing they were going to do during that period. So those little jobs or responsibilities sometimes have a huge payoff and they feel like they contributed, which distracts them from maybe the fact that they weren't being patient or they didn't want to take on today's obstacle of what everybody else was doing. So I really think to connect it back to my original point, it's saying, hey, look, your kids are coming back to this environment that's going to be new. They're going to be testing their patience and perseverance. And you've been practicing it all of COVID. I mean, you've been practicing your whole life, but here's the ability for you to say, hey, welcome to this new place. Let's learn some of these skills that are really, really important. And that's really where I'm focused on when it comes to these skills for this year. So Matt, what about you? What are you going to be hitting on?
Yeah, I like that you talked about that it's an opportunity for campers to learn these skills as well. But I think what you touched on when you were saying that, like sometimes campers move at a faster pace or they don't want to do the thing you had planned for them. I've learned this, from working at a school this past year, is that kids constantly require your patience. And you have to remember that they don't see the world like you do, and their levels of empathy, their perspective, their reasoning, their judgment, all of those things, they just don't have as much life experience as you do. And they don't have the sense of responsibility that you do as a counselor, right? It's not required that in their minds that they have to go do this thing, but as a counselor, sometimes they have to go do that thing, and it's hard. So I think just having that patience and the perseverance of understanding that we want them to have this great camp experience. And I'll touch on this a little bit later too. And sometimes you have to either just endure, or you have to be creative, or you have to adapt to where they're at. And that takes patience on your part, just taking a deep breath and being like, does this really matter in this moment? Is this the hill I'm going to die on as a counselor? Does it really matter that much? And usually the answer is no. Sometimes it's yes, and we'll talk about that later, but usually the answer is no. The other thing I'll say is not to be deterred from failure, right? That's the perseverance side of this, is that if you had a rough week or a session that you were running, a program that you're running that didn't go well, or maybe you got a bad evaluation or some feedback that that really stung that week, know that you are resilient enough to try it again. COVID has taught us that we can get kicked down 100 times and we can stand back up 101 times, right? And I think that's such a great lesson, because camp, we talk about how camp is the best place in the world, but what I've started to think is that camp is the best place in the world to fail, or camp is the best place in the world to mess up, because we have such a supportive and strong community around us. And if you're at the right camp and in the right place, you have a whole group of people that only want to see you succeed. So knowing that you don't have to be patient and persevere alone, knowing that you have a community there with you to do it, can really help you continue to build those patient skills within the context of camp.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point right there at the end, where, camp is the safe place to fail. And I want to start using the word, oh, well, I flop a lot, right? Like it's not a failure, it's a flop. And I can flip and get back to what I needed to do, right? And it's a little bit more fun language probably to have at camp. So maybe talk about the flops that you have at camp, and how at camp we can flip them back. All right, so moving on, we're practical. So we did our P's. Now let's talk about our R's, which are risk management. And Matt, can you connect this to the pandemic for us and how we have seen this skill?
Certainly. Well, risk management isn't a phrase that I definitely did not think of it as a 16-year-old camp counselor. I learned it at camp later when I was a director and when I was in charge of risk management, and then risk management gets kind of scary. But risk management is kind of the everyday decisions that we make to make a situation safe or more safe. And we have all become kind of micro experts at risk management through the pandemic, because this is a very severe public health crisis, right? And if we understand the severity of the pandemic and we understand our part in the safety of others and our community, that is risk management there. And then the way we manage risk is that we make decisions about doing the right things to keep people safe, or make it as safe as possible. So for instance, I'm sure many of our listeners out there were faced with a choice, when you were maybe in a lockdown or a stay-at-home order, and there was an opportunity to maybe go over to a friend's house or to do something that wouldn't follow the current COVID rules. And having that good perspective on risk management, coupled with a little bit of integrity, we understand that following the COVID rules, even when they're super inconvenient, is a positive health choice, is a positive risk management choice. And remaining vigilant and keeping aware of ourselves and how our decisions are affecting our community, especially in a health way, that's something that I definitely did not think about as a 16, 17-year-old. And the pandemic, I know that there's like COVID anxiety where people are feeling completely paralyzed by the fear of getting someone else sick. But in a more general case, I think it's just made us a little bit more aware of how our actions, even a sneeze, how that impacts a community, right? So I think that we've all taken a bit of a crash course in risk management. So Oliver, how do we, if risk management is a new term for some people, or they might have heard glimpses of it before, how do we help them connect it to what the camp counselor experience will be like this year?
Yeah, I think one of the great things, again, using that word like it's a positive, one of the learning experiences we've had because of COVID this year, great learning advantages of COVID, was that the awkwardness of risk management has kind of been eliminated. That like mentioning that maybe something may be risky, or saying like, hey, maybe hold back from doing something like that, or even having the inclination to tell someone, hey, it would be safer if you did this, has kind of become more generally acceptable, right? Yes, you still have to be tactful. That hasn't been eliminated from it, but your ability to mention safety to people has become much more available in our language in the world. And for translating that over to camp, I think, at camp, we've always thought about slips, trips, and falls. Like, how can someone get hurt doing an activity, like 3 points of contact on a canoe, or making sure you're tying your knots right at high ropes, or making sure everybody is not downrange when you start shooting, because that would be super dangerous if everybody was. But it's about the little things that we're now doing. So with COVID, right, we were told you had to stand 6 feet away from people, keep that physical distance, or, we learned more about washing our hands. These are small, very small little details that had to change in our lives so that we could be safer. And those things are still present every day in camp. And I think a lot of counselors have always struggled with them, but now you have this strength where you have, learned these skills because of COVID that you can now translate into camp. And some of those skills, those minute ones that get forgotten, are, making sure that campers are being supervised when they go to those bathroom breaks, right? Like, it's not just saying like, oh, you need to go to the bathroom. Well, this would be really tough for me if I can't get coverage or can't figure out a treadie or something. Now, okay, this is a safety thing. This is, making sure our kids are being supervised all the time. That's a big one. But it's also like making sure your kids are drinking water, making sure that they're putting on their sunscreen. Matt and I have talked about these things on the podcast before, but I think you as a person going through COVID in the last year have learned about those little self-care things, those little risk management things that you have to do. And one that I want to bring up that I think is really cool is language and conversation topics, right? It's just another one of those little ones of like, what are my campers talking about? What are the words that they're using? Because another thing that's happened because of COVID this year is a lot of us were online. A lot of our kids were online. TikTok exploded, right? This access to information, it's been present for, a few years with everybody, but now our campers are learning, and the newest trends are days apart, if that, right? One trend starts before the other is even finished. And, some of those things are, like swearing or like topics that are maybe inappropriate for kids. And your kids are going to be coming and bringing those to camp. And another risk management and safety thing you have to do as a counselor is kind of overhear those conversations they might be talking about and find a way to cater those conversations into a more proactive way, right? It doesn't always have to be something like, oh, is that something appropriate to be talking about at camp? But maybe engaging in conversation and talking campers through those more difficult things. And I think that's a little bit of something that you're going to start to see this summer. It's always been present at camp. Don't think it's something new, right? Like, campers always come to camp with newfound mysteries of the world that they're not supposed to know about. It's sure. Just, I think in this last year with COVID, I think because we were all online so much, because of the boom of TikTok and social media has been booming for years. It was Instagram and then Facebook before. That hasn't changed, but that access, it's coming in a little bit more to camp, I think, more than ever, and it will continue. And I think your job as a counselor who's a role model and is looking at the same things they are really is to be the person who can cater those conversations. So I would, even as a counselor, start planning about what kind of things you might talk about. So when you scroll through TikTok later tonight after listening to our podcast, or even while you listen, take that moment to think about like, oh man, I just watched 15 short TikToks that all have swears in them, or all talk about, inappropriate conversations for a 9-year-old to hear. And think about how you might find out that conversation you're going to have later this summer. So that's mine as far as risk management. It's the little things that are now what you're going to have to be paying attention to more often, I think. And you have that social acceptability to start saying stuff. And I think that's become more natural. All right.
I think if we go back to like the definition of the word risk management, as opposed to like being safety conscious. I think risk management assumes that there is risk, right? There will be risk to begin with. So whether it's what kids are, I think that's really smart, Oliver, what they're coming into camp with after being in lockdown, the behaviors that could be risky in that sense. But we know that camp is risky. And that's one of the great things about it, right? There are trees to climb, there are places to run and jump, and there are social situations that have potential risk in them. And risk management says, okay, this risk is here, and how do I manage it? Not so the risk goes away, but so that people come out the other side of that risk, either feeling just as good as they went in or even better. So for a camp counselor, you're right, Oliver, it's those little things, but it's also the little decisions that you have to make. So I find that risk management is the balance of saying yes. We talk a lot of this podcast about saying yes to the kooky ideas that campers have, but it's also your idea to have that risk management mindset, looking out for people's physical safety, mental safety, emotional safety, all those things. And it's not just doing what is easy, but doing what's right in the moment. So when a kid comes up with their wonderfully creative idea or topic of conversation, and they want to do it, so sometimes those things that they want to do might be A, against the rules, B, not great for them in the long run, or C, physically or emotionally unsafe. And we just know that to be true as a camp counselor. We know that jumping off the top of the dining hall, if it's 2 stories up, is not a safe thing to do. And it may feel like in the short term, it's easier to not pick a fight or just give in or be the quote unquote cool counselor. I know that you won't let your kids jump off of a roof. But being the cool counselor, quote unquote, I hate that so much, because that's not actually what they need in that moment, right? That's not what they want, they really need. And in all 3 of the above points, their decision or that thing that might be unsafe can actually hinder their camp experience, right? So if they break the rules, they might have to go home, or they might do something that is unsafe and the rule was there because it was safe, and then they have to go home because they got injured, right? Injury is a reason why kids might have to go home and they don't get the camp experience. Or for instance, I said point B back there was that it's not great for them in the long run. If a kid wants to stay up all night and they want the whole cabin to stay up all night, you as the camp counselor, the reason that you kindly say no to that is because they're going to be grumpy the next day, and they're going to be like really, really tough to work with. And it's going to hinder their camp experience and everybody else's camp experience that group of campers has to work with the next day. And that's why it's your job as a camp counselor to manage that risk and still be creative and still figure that out. So we're not advocating for you to completely control every single thing and take risk out of the equation, but it's knowing how to tread the line, and it's knowing when you need to assert the rules, when you need to dance around them creatively, or when you need to do both all at the same time, because that's what we do as camp counselors.
Yeah, and that last bit there, Matt, is really what I wanted to hit on real fast. Is we're not eliminating risk, we're managing it. We still want our campers to see, feel, understand, be a part of, and experience risk. That is the safe reason why we have camp. And just like we talked about flops and failures before, campers are coming to camp to experience those things. Your job as a counselor is to make sure it doesn't get to a level that is dangerous, inappropriate, or something farther in one of those categories. Your job is to make sure they have those experiences and maybe start to learn how to manage risk themselves.
Yes.
So I think that is the core there. And, we're going to keep moving on. We have P covered. We have R covered. Let's talk about A. Matt, what are we talking about for topic A?
Yes, A is adaptability, and the word pivot comes to mind. Was one of our favorite pandemic words, was pivot, and because every single person that I know, I did a quick mental calculation of every single person that I know, and they all had to pivot in some way. the world very, very quickly looked a heck of a lot different. And suddenly the way that we always did things either wouldn't work or were dangerous to do. Like we couldn't hug people. We couldn't, we couldn't shake hands with people when we were at that conference together, right? Oliver, when we were at Tri-State, it was, everyone was elbow bumping all of a sudden. And can you imagine there was no pandemic and then all of a sudden everyone just decided to elbow bump? Like if you made camp people elbow bump instead of hug, it was frustrating. It was weird. It was hard. It was the first time Oliver and I had met and we couldn't hug each other, which is very strange. And I think we all learned a little bit in this pandemic about our locus of control, in that, we're focusing on the things that we can change and letting go of the things that we can't change. And thankfully at camp, the circumstances as to why things change usually aren't as dire as a global pandemic, but there will certainly be times where you need to be adaptable, and where that is one of the best mindsets that you can have as a camp counselor. And one thing that your director, your camp community, and your own mental health will benefit the most from and that's if you can be adaptable. So Oliver, what's a specific time where you're going to be forced to be adaptable as a camp counselor?
Yeah, I think as a counselor this summer, one of the most important things that you'll have to be adaptable with is leadership styles. Who your, boys or girls or, village leader is, or your program leader, or your activity leader, or your summer camp director, or your assistant summer camp director, or your executive director, whoever is up the chain, right? They have had to change how they run camp, or have had to evaluate everything that they know. And trust me, like I've been in camp for just about 10 years now. For those who have been in camp for 30 years, that has to be a whirlwind of a change, right? Everything from staffing structures to operations to food service, everything has changed. Everything has changed at camp. And you're going to be coming into camp, and we are also in this generation, we have learned that we are questioning decision making and how things are in operation. I know that myself as a millennial does it. Gen Z does it even more so. I am sure the generation that is coming up after them is going to be even more questioning of their environment. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing or not to do it, but what I am saying is this year, I think your adaptability with different types of leadership is going to be so important. It's going to be, all right, it's going to be understanding that the people who are in charge of you have made decisions that they probably don't like, but they have had to make them because it makes camp possible. And now they are enforcing them despite their not liking them, so that kids can still come and experience camp. And that's just on the COVID side, right?
Right.
On the other side, it's about being, I don't want to say a good follower, but it's about being somebody who is adaptable in what is necessary to happen at camp. And it might be changes that, camp hasn't had in forever are now coming into place as well. So it might be this chance for camp that, might have been shut down for a year or 2 years to now say, hey, we're going to open up and we're going to change a few things. We're going to try some things we haven't done before. Yep. We're going to see if this new experience kind of works with our campers. I know as people who have been in camp for years, camp is cyclical, right? Every 3 to 5 years, camp is kind of going through a changeover. And there is going to be no more changeover than for a camp that hasn't operated in 2 years, right? Camp is, and especially with all the operations that are changing because of COVID. So your job as a staff member who's coming into the summer is saying, okay, cool. What's needed of me? What can I do to make this operation possible? It's not questioning the changes that have been put in place, but how can you take the changes that have been put into place and make them happen, right? And I think that's sometimes where our questioning nature of our generations really gets stuck, is we need to know why. We need to know, like what went behind this decision-making process.
Yeah.
Well, I had a different experience, and from my understanding, it should be this way. I'm going to be a little brutal right now with my honesty, but at a certain point, your director or your executive director or your leadership staff member, they have to make that decision. It's on them. The buck stops with them. And if they're going to make that decision, unless it's clearly unsafe, which we always talk about, your job is to say, all right, cool, I think I can make that possible. I think I can change what my mindset was or what I was going to do, or what I had imagined to do what I may think can't be done, right? And we'll talk about that decision-making process or that action next with our next letter. But I think it's, and we talk about it a lot in sports, it's coachability. It's this ability to be told, like, all right, in football, stay low, right? That is something, if you are a football player, you've heard that 1,000 times. If you're a baseball player, keep your eye on the ball, right? All these little coaching points, yeah, they make sense because we've heard them 1,000 times. But if you are introduced to a sport for the first time, it might seem weird when someone's telling you to do this or to do that. So what's your coachability? What's your adaptability when it comes into this summer? And that's my focus point.
I love that you're talking about the mindset that we want camp counselors to have. Like, what does an adaptable mindset mean? And and we're definitely not talking about, we don't want you just to like fall in line, right? That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that things change fast at camp, and you just won't always have the knowledge of why things are going to change, right? And it could be, summer to summer, things definitely do change, but it's moment to moment too, right? Someone gets sick, someone gets injured, the schedule needs to change, there's been a double booking, and sometimes you just got to roll with the punches, and you can either, complain, get upset. But it's the same as COVID, right? We could have either complained that we couldn't hug each other at the camp conference, or we could give each other an elbow bump and still chat about how great it is to see each other for the first time. Right. And that, I like the coachability thing too, because we still want you to bring your individual talents and your opinions and your ideas into the metaphorical game that we're setting up here. But we still need to make sure that the game is played correctly and that everyone is safe while we're playing the game, if we're going to play that metaphor out, right? So you may have this plan as a counselor of who you're going to be a co with. Maybe you were told a week ahead of time that, Matt, you get to be Oliver's co this week, and we've made this really great plan with our cabin. Or you have this great session. You listen to our Planning Perfect Programs episode, and you have this great session that you had. Or even what your job is going to look like from week to week. But for whatever reason, we know that change happens at camp. And the mark of a great camp counselor, a first-class counselor, if you will, is someone who is adaptable. So that, like I said, that doesn't mean just saying, okay, and moving on. It's about asking good questions, not just asking why. That's not a very helpful question in that mentality. You could say, what is that going to look like? Or what do I need to know? Or, think of a smart question that you can ask, one that isn't just saying, why, because that's not extremely helpful. And then it's starting to make that mentality, flipping your mindset from being upset about it to thinking about the opportunities that this change is going to bring about. Maybe you're going to learn a new skill in the job, or maybe it's someone that you haven't had the chance to work with this summer, and you can get to know them a little bit better. And then, unless there's a really big problem or something seems unsafe about it, make it work. Just make it happen. And how do you make it work? That seems like a very unhelpful thing, just to say, make it work. Well, how you make it work is our next point. So that's my little segue into our last point here. Before I segue, I will say, check out, we just did an episode a little bit ago about rainy day programs, and that will help you be adaptable, because rainy day, extreme hot or extreme rain is something that's going to make you be adaptable. So Oliver, any points on this before we move into our last letter for this episode?
No, I'm ready to talk about our next point. So let's see what C is.
Yes, C is creativity. And I was debating in my head. I was like, well, is adaptability and creativity the same thing? And I don't think it is, because being adaptable is a mindset, right? It's about being able to move on. And then how you move on, we want to do so creatively. In the pandemic, we were consistently forced to innovate, right? From online schooling to virtual hangouts to distance gathering to learning new hobbies. We really, like I said earlier, we had two choices during the pandemic. We could either sit at home and twiddle our thumbs and be sad about being in a pandemic, or we could find another way to learn, to connect with people, and to play. And so I'm sure everyone's individual experience. I would love to hear all the weird and wacky hobbies that our listeners took up during the pandemic. Who made some bread? Maybe you made some kombucha for the first time. You did some pretty creative things. So your creativity, we've talked about this many times, is that's one of the greatest skills as a camp counselor is your creativity. So make sure that you are ready in an interview to connect that creativity with what you're going to do at camp. So if folks all of are listening to us for the first time and they haven't heard us talk about creativity and how you use it at camp, what's a tip you can give them on when they're going to be forced or have the opportunity to be creative at camp?
Yeah, I think most of the time when we're creative, it is because we're being forced. I think there is such thing as open creativity, where you really do come up with something that is like an epiphany. But I think truly when we are most creative, it's when we're kind of forced into a box. And I've talked about this definitely on the show before, of in the box thinking. So think about all the you can'ts that you're given, and then realize that they're an opportunity for you to really work around, right? And we'll do this on a really small scale first, and then we'll kind of go big scale. But think about it. All right, you can't spend this much money. You can only spend this amount of money. You can't be on this section of camp, or you can only be on this section of camp. You can only have this many campers participating in the activity, and it can only be this age group, right? You're given these parameters, and so many people get stuck on the fact of like, well, capture the flag is usually the entire camp. We use the whole property. We get banner, everyone gets, what do you call them? Headbands and armbands, and that are their team color. And, These are all the things that we've always done.
Right.
And all of a sudden you get caught up in what you've always done, which is this line that kills you, right? Because now you're stuck in the box. When in reality, all these things that are being launched into this box, all these you can'ts or you have to do this, are actually tools for you to use to either A, climb out of the box, or B, explode the box itself and really show people how awesome you can do things. So, somebody says, oh, it can only be for this age group. Well, cool. Now I have a list of age appropriate activities or age appropriate things that I know I can work with.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Exactly.
You can only do the activity in the amphitheater. Everything else is taken tonight. Cool. So I know I am putting on some type of a show tonight, right? Because I have a stage and I have lights, and I can probably put a microphone up there. Maybe we do a karaoke lip sync that night, right? Or someone tells you you can't spend any money. Well, guess what? Doing a lip sync doesn't need any money. You probably have a speaker on your camp. You probably have a phone that can play the songs that every kid knows and they can sing along to. Congratulations, you have a free program, right? Thinking creatively is coming up with ideas based off of the stipulations you've been given, right? Even Picasso at one point decided, hey, cool, I'm going to use paint. Paint is my medium, right? And I think that's what people get stuck on is they get told they can't, or they sit there and they go, oh, I have to plan an evening program, but I wasn't given any parameters. You're like, man, on one side, you're asking for all these things that I can't give you. On the other side, you're asking for some form of parameter to work with. So it's your poison either way. So you might as well take the things you have and go, man, I can do a lot with these. And I think that's really where creativity comes from, is from those points there. And I think using those this summer, you're going to have a great time. So that's my creativity spiel. And I'll give the same one every single time someone asks me about it.
No, I love it. It makes total sense. I think that, and I think that the constraints, if you want to call them constraints, which I think we're advocating you don't, you call them just the parameters. That's helpful, right? If someone told me, hey, Matt, you're coming to my camp and I want you to do an evening program, and that's all they gave me, that immediately I'd be like, okay, so, I'm going to do cloud watching for 2 hours. And I can make cloud watching pretty creative. I'm pretty good at that kind of stuff. But but then they're going to tell me, oh, it's indoors. And then my whole right, then I'm gonna be adapting. The question that I'm gonna ask them is, where am I doing it? How many people am I doing it with? Right. I want to know those parameters. And then I know where the box is, like you said, and then I know how much space I have to be creative within it. So it's interesting like that. And connecting, and I'll give you a bit of a practical tip of how you can do that. That connects to the last point about being adaptable. It's about looking at what you wanted to do or what you want to do in a situation and breaking that down into what are the goals of what you wanted to accomplish, and then making those same goals work in innovative or creative ways. So for example, if you are on soccer, say your camp, and it just says on the schedule, Oliver, soccer, 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. But it gets called off for rain, and your camp's policy is that if you're running a program, you still have to run the program. It doesn't have to be the same, but you have to run a program. So you can either shake your fist at the sky and get mad that it's going to rain, or you can first follow our last tip and be adaptable, and then be creative. And the way you be creative is, let's look at soccer. What are the goals? Some of the goals of soccer. Soccer teaches teamwork, some fine motor skills with your feet, and it's an opportunity to have fun and be competitive with people. So is there a team game or initiative or something soccer-ish that can teach some of those skills? Of course there is, right? And you have people around you at camp that can help you with those, right? You might have someone who's an expert at team building stuff, or maybe someone that's been playing a bunch of cool sports and they can help you, or you just use some of the ideas you've seen in the past. So for me, my brain went to, okay, this could be a bull ring activity, which is an activity where everyone's holding a string, there's a ball balanced in the middle, and it could be like you're trying to score a goal by getting the ball from point A to point B, and you're making an obstacle course for people to move, right? There's team, there's fine motor skills, there's having fun, and there's being competitive, all in those, all within that session that you've planned for them. And is it the same as soccer? No. Does that really matter? No, it doesn't. I would also say that we talked about being creative and adaptable, and I wondered about what creative things you listeners did over the pandemic. How can you teach that to kids? If you made bread, you know how to make bread now. Why not teach that skill to campers? And if you can, make bread for the whole camp, right? You learned an instrument, teach that instrument if your camp has access to it. You have probably gained a really interesting skill that could be taught to kids in some way, shape, or form, right? I took up disc golf a little bit more over the pandemic, and I ran a disc golf club at school this year because I loved it so much. Am I the best disc golf player in the world? No. Am I pretty good? Sometimes. But now I have a bunch of kids at my school who love playing disc golf because it was just an opportunity for me to share it with them. And at camp, we don't expect you to be the expert at pretty much anything. We expect you to have the core competencies for whatever we hire you for. But especially if you're a generalist or a camp counselor, we want you to learn these skills. We want you to practice them. And if you flop a couple of times, I love that flop because you can flip Oliver. I think that is brilliant. If you flop a couple of times, then that's fine. Kids are pretty forgiving, and it's an opportunity for you to do it better for the next group of kids you work with. So don't be afraid to be creative, and just remember to go back to the goals of what you were trying to accomplish in the first place. And that little extra set of constraints will help you innovate and help you be creative.
There we go. So that is all of our practical skills. Well, almost. That's the P.R.A.C. of it all. If you really like those, you can reach out to Matt and I and say, hey, let's finish the word practical. What are the other 4 letters? We want to know the mystery. Can you identify them for us? And we would love to do that for you. Just leave a comment or a like. But before we end the show, we always give our eggles. So this is our ever growing, ever learning. It's a little section of the show that gives you a practical skill that you get to walk away with so you can become better every single day. So I'll start mine, and I'll make mine pretty quick. there's an app that I'm starting to use on my phone called InShot. But also I'm now saving like every audio on Instagram Reels that I can find, because I just want to have that bank of audios ready so I know all the trends that are happening now, because I can't do them for camp right now. But if I'm like in summer camp mode and all of a sudden I like whip out my phone one day and I like listen to one of the many audios that I'm saving now, I can go, oh, cool, I can do that trend. It's, yeah, 6 to 8 months after the fact, but who cares? I can still do that for it. So InShot, if you don't know or haven't used it, is an app. It's basically just a video editor. So you can take all the videos you film on your phone, you throw them onto there really quickly, and you can cut and crop them and make the little series that you want, and you can even add audio to it. Yes, I know you can do the same things on Instagram now, but I really liked InShot. It's when I like first started using before Instagram Reels and TikTok became a little bit more user friendly, and I honestly just think it works a little bit better than those, because I know that sometimes I get frustrated with like where I can put video and stuff on Instagram. So check out InShot. It might be an easier way for you to cut and crop your video and then throw it into the app for your sound and everything else that you're looking for. So check it out. But my bigger, I guess, advice here is save those audios, right? So that when you get to summer, even if you're not the media person, if you are promoting camp, even for yourself personally, right? Of like you and your friends having a great time during the summer, those experiences, that's things that you can send to your camp director after summer or even during summer that they can then use, to advertise camp, because your smiling face, your positivity is what camp markets. It's what we do. So I'm saving those audios. You should save those audios too. And then you can make a nice little bank of camp videos at the end of the summer that are all like great memory videos for you to show off. So that's my E.G.E.L. So save those audios and check out InShot.
I like that too. It made me think of if we're talking about interviewing and that kind of thing, how cool, Oliver, how amazing would it be if a counselor showed up to interview with you and they had a couple TikToks following the trends or whatever, something going on that spoke to their skills as a camp counselor. And they're like, hey, I made these. This is why I think that I'd be great for this job. How creative and awesome would that be? So InShot could be a way for you to do that.
Just for every single person listening, like if you are a American counselor, no, there are internationals right now who are applying, and I mean, they do every year. COVID hopefully doesn't stop them from coming to America, but they make video profiles. They introduce themselves, all that kind of stuff, and they have a link that you can go and watch, and it helps me as a employer get to know them a little bit better. I get to see them in their like hometown doing something they love. It's great. I would not, I will not regret saying this, but I 100% feel that within, like 10 years maximum, I think a lot of our applications and things that we're going to be doing are going to have some form of media that goes with it, just so that we can really show off what our skills are. Resume CVs, they're only going to last, I think, so much longer. I think they'll kind of be present for a long time, but I think people are going to want to see that proof of skills through a video and get to hear your voice and get to know you. So I think, think about how you present yourself online and how you could present yourself when you go into an interview.
Totally. Okay, I'm going to go in a very different direction for my E.G.E.L today, and that is, it's a classic game. One of my things that my friend group jokingly complains about with me all the time is that I always want to play a game. I could play games. I don't love to just sit around and chat. I'll do it once in a while, but I'd rather be playing a game and chatting. So a game that I've really come to love is paper football. And it's been around for such a long time that it feels kind of even silly to mention it now. But if you've never played it before, it's super duper fun. You just take a piece of paper, you fold it down into a little triangle, and then you sit across a desk or a table from someone. And the goal is that you take the piece of paper, you have it dangling off your edge of the table, and you hit it so it slides on the table. And the goal is to get it within, if you want to call it 4 downs, American football, you could be Canadian football, call it 3 downs, or go for a challenge and just 2 downs, which is Uzbekistan football rules, actually 2 downs. I'm just kidding. I'm just making that up. But anyway, your goal is to get the piece of paper to hang off the edge of the table on your opponent's side. And if you get to hang off, that's 6 points for a touchdown. And then you get to set the football triangle up on its edge, and your opponent makes a field goal with their fingers and they flick it through. And that's how you get the 7th point. It's really awkward to explain, but I'll share a link in the show notes of this video to some guys that I follow on YouTube that they play this in their office and have a nice big competition, friendly competition for it. Paper football, it's a great time. I would just, if I was a camp counselor, I would just keep a paper football folded in my rainy day kit or in my backpack that I could just bust it out at, if you're waiting for a meal to start, anything like that, you get a big game of paper football going with one kid or a bunch of kids. So paper football.
And it's one of those things that like catches on, and eventually like you'll have a session, for some reason it gets crazy and every kid has a paper football. They're all like colored up, so they all look super cool. Yeah, you can design what they look like with a marker. It's so easy. And then you can name your paper footballs, right? Like everyone has a team name for their paper football.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's free. It's a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And you can play on a picnic table. You can play any like surface. I've seen kids play on our like front deck of the camp porch. It's huge, but
yeah, I guess you don't even need a table, right? You could just play on the ground and have a little line where the touchdown line is. You don't need a table. Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, that is our show for today. If you enjoyed today's show, we'd be so grateful if you left us a review wherever you are listening to this podcast. Your ratings and reviews not only help us know what you like and don't like about the show, but it helps boost our rankings and helps more people discover the show.
And don't forget that we have some links for this episode in the show notes. So if you want to find out more about those, check out the show notes. They're at gocamp.pro/FCC. And if you go to gocamp.pro/podcast, you'll see lots of other great stuff there from our shows and all the other Go Camp Pro podcasts out there. I've especially been listening to the Camp Owners podcast lately, and Howie and Kelly there's 2 episodes right in a row. The last 2 that have been about buying a camp. And that was definitely an aspiration of mine as a young camp counselor, that I was going to buy my own camp. And I still feel that way sometimes too. So it's really great to hear industry experts, people who have done that and people who are experts in that field. So if you're a camp counselor, why not dream big, think big, listen to those 2 episodes of the Camp Owners podcast and get inspired.
Yeah, my shout out this week definitely goes to Camp Hacker. I really, really, really loved the episode about delegation. I think it was phenomenal, not just for leadership staff to listen to, but also for, a counselor to listen to and kind of understand like the decision making that their leaders are going through. And really, that was almost the heart and soul of when we were talking about, up top about some of our topics. We're really kind of in the back of my head with adaptability and talking about those leaders. So check out that episode. I think it was phenomenal. But with that being said, thanks for listening, friends. And remember, camp is camp and camp's all good.